going to find that. Hi everyone. So thanks for joining us tonight. Good to see you all on screen. It was good to catch up before as well. Oh, we've got some more joining, which is the Stantons are there, the Gehrings. Hello there. So tonight we've got it's actually a two-part series. You don't have to, and this is part one, so you haven't missed anything. But we will run over two sessions because the topic of technology and Shabbat is huge, and we won't obviously be able to discuss everything. But we will discuss, firstly, some principles of Shabbat, and we'll also discuss how technology over the years has really made the rabbis think about how it applies.
Can hardly hear.
Okay. You okay, Henry?
Why can't you hear?
I don't know.
Henry, turn your volume up.
Turn the volume up, Henry. We can hear you. Okay, so we're going to start with, obviously, we all know, and I think everyone on this call realizes, because you're all regulars, how important Shabbat is in our religion. And that's regardless of what level of observance you are. We all recognize that whatever you do, Shabbos is important. It's important to stop after your 6 days of work and to, sort of refresh yourself and stay with the family and have Shabbat. It's also a topic, and part of these shiurim, we actually followed the cycle of Daf Yomi, which is those people that learn 1 page of Talmud every day when they finish the whole Talmud in 7 years. And in fact, the past 6 weeks have been Shabbat, and it's one of the longest track dates. So it's actually going to go for another few months as well. And we are in the middle of it. So it's actually very topical for anyone learning Daf Yomi, which is, I do that as well. Now, the laws of Shabbat are extremely complicated. There are hundreds of books written about it. It takes years to master it. In fact, it's interesting that rabbis, when they get their smicha, don't learn Shabbat because it's assumed knowledge. They learn all the harder bits. Because when they started giving smichas to people, they assumed that everyone knew the laws of Shabbat, and to be a rabbi, you have to know more than everybody else. But in today's day and age, Shabbat is actually really complicated, and in fact, it's probably more practical to learn Shabbat to become a rabbi. But it is something very important. And on the face of the laws of Shabbat, if you actually look at many of the rules and you're not educated in all the principles and you haven't learnt it, some of it can look a bit confusing or complicated. Some of it sounds like we're making a big deal about nothing. One of the attendees today told me before that they don't believe that electricity is relevant for Shabbat. And I'm about to prove them both right and wrong on this shiur today, so we'll talk about that as well. And it's also important to realize that the Torah has a list of principles that are Torah laws, but the rabbis have a bunch of principles that are rabbinic laws. And they make the Shabbat laws more complicated and more extensive. But the reason they do that is really important. That's because Shabbat is such a fundamental that the rabbis decided they're going to make the laws to ensure that we don't even breach a Torah law. The rabbinic laws encompass it. And we'll talk about that. But the way, in practical purposes, whether it's a Torah law or rabbinic law, we don't make a distinction. We don't say, oh, it's a rabbinic law, don't worry about it. It's just as important to follow Torah law and rabbinic law. But where it does make a difference, for example, is for medical reasons where we can be a bit more lenient, or obviously for life reasons we can be more lenient. Now, technological advances always challenge halakha. And I think it's important to realize that the Torah is not a static document. In fact, the word halakha, which is Jewish law, the actual technical word for it is movement. Halakha means walking, because the idea of halakha is that it actually walks with us over the generations. As new things come into being created or invented, halakha follows along with us, and it can be interpreted to how it works. Now, you might not always like the answer, but halakha can deal with any situation, and we've dealt with that over the months of our shiurim. But today we'll talk about technical advances and Shabbat and the implications for that. So we're going to discuss the principles of Shabbat. So I'll give you a bit of background about the really important principles of Shabbat. Some you might know and some you may not. I'm going to show you how a very important question came up and how the rabbis analyzed it. And we're going to do that together. So for some of this shiur, it's not going to be so practical, more theoretical, because we are actually going to analyze the principles of Shabbat on the question, but eventually we will get to some practical things and how we learn out of it. And really, if we actually understood the principles and how we apply it, we can answer any question if we're smart enough about anything that comes up, both current or future generations. So we will talk about some principles, but we're actually going to talk about today, we're going to focus on electricity and Shabbat. So electricity is everything. Our whole life is electricity, whether it's turning on lights, our mobile phones, everything uses electricity. So we will talk about the first time that electricity came about and electrical appliances and how the rabbis looked at it in terms of Shabbat. And you might be surprised at the end as to what they came up with. Part of the fun of learning about this is actually how to apply it. And this is a discussion. So I'm more than happy for you to listen and then disagree or add your own opinion. But at the end, we will bring it back to more practical solutions. So if you're happy to, on that basis, we will start. Now, Shabbos is very interesting because one of the things that we get wrong and everyone gets wrong is the fact that you cannot work on Shabbat. Now, when we think about work, we think of, going to the gym, we think about exercise, we think about heavy lifting, we think about schwitzing, we think about work in terms of going to work, an office, or if you're a plumber, plumbing, to work. But in fact, the word work is the wrong word to use when talking about Shabbat. The word we need to use is melacha. Melacha means work. Great. Melacha is actually can't be translated. The best way to talk about it is to think about it is something that's creative work, right? Creative work. So going to the gym and schwitzing for half an hour, even though it is hard work, is not melacha because you're not creating anything new. I mean, yeah, you're getting a bit fitter, losing a bit of weight, but you're not creating anything new. We need to think about Shabbat in those terms. But the Torah made it very easy for us. It actually described to us what they consider melacha. And how do they know that? There's something called the tabernacle, the Mishkan. Have you all heard of the tabernacle? Just give a nod to your head if you've heard of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was basically the portable temple. So when we were in the desert for 40 years, we were commanded by the Torah to build this tabernacle, the Mishkan, that we would take throughout the desert, right? And the Mishkan had those cherubs on top. It had the ark, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that was missing. The ark, it had a boundary. It had an altar for sacrifices. It was basically a temple, but portable. And it was portable because, as you know, we were wandering in the desert for 40 years. And every time we picked up, every time we camped, and every time we left, we assembled the Mishkan, and we disassembled the Mishkan, and we took it with us, and we assembled it again at the next stop. So basically, the Torah says that all Torah laws are connected to the building and the demolishing of the Mishkan. Now, I'm going to try and share with you a screen, and I hope this works, and just scream out if it doesn't. But this is a copy of the Mishkan, right? Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
I've got a thumb up some Paul, that's good. Now, as you'll notice, there's some partitions around the whole edifice there. It's a whole it's a structure. There's an altar there of brass, as you can see, which is where they brought the sacrifices. There's that colorful thing in the middle. I'll show you my mouse if you can see it. That's the Mishkan. So inside there was the ark, which had inside the 10 Commandments, right? And that's probably the most holiest part of it. Now, as you can see, it's very portable. So it's something that you can set up and dismantle as you go along. So the Torah tells us that if you want to know what melacha means on Shabbat, if you want to know what work means, it's anything that they did to erect or disassemble the Mishkan. And I'll give you some examples. So you can see here, if you can see with my mouse, the colored Mishkan. Now that was made of material. It was made of wool, it had colors, it was dyed. Basically, if you look on the left here, in the top left, there's a list of things that they did to create that covering. So you can see it says plowing, planting, harvesting, gathering, threshing, winnowing, selecting, grinding, kneading, baking. And why did they do all those things? They did it to grow and process plants to make the dyes for the wool and the skins that they covered the Mishkan with, right? So the reason today that we cannot go and plow our fields, right? We don't have fields, but just go with me for a second, is because in the temple, in the Mishkan, they harvested things to make dyes, to make the wool of the Mishkan. Let's look at another example here. On the bottom left, kindling and extinguishing. So you can't light a fire. Why? They lit the fire to make the dye, to make the wool for the coverings. Let's have a look over on the bottom right, carrying. They used to carry the wood to set up the Mishkan and to build it, right? And if you go a bit above to building and demolishing, To build on Shabbat is a malacha. Right? Building or demolishing is a malacha. And of course, underneath is writing and erasing. You can't write or erase things. So the Mishkan had a lot of malachot, pieces of work that was involved in setting it up, dismantling, and moving across the desert. Now, there are 39 categories of work, 39. One of them is not going to the gym, right? So technically where we're up to now is you could go to the gym because it doesn't involve plowing or planting or kindling or carrying or writing or raising or building, right? So if it's one of those things, it is work. Now let's delve into that for a minute. So I'm going to show you, now this is actually a bit of a cartoon book, but it's actually the best way to show you the Malachot of Shabbat. It's actually a kid's book, but it's really complicated. So don't get put off by the fact that it looks like a Where's Wally. It's actually a really cool book, a very helpful book. Can you all see now the word plowing on top?
Yeah.
So you can see the old, who's not old, but the young Jew, right? You probably won't see this ever nowadays, maybe in Israel. But this man here is preparing the earth for planting, plowing. Now, what's that to do with us today? You can see there's a little guy there digging a hole. The plowing just means preparing the earth for planting. Now, that's not relevant to us who are lawyers and doctors and accountants and plumbers. Or maybe a plumber, actually, because they need to dig holes sometimes, right? But digging a hole, which is what you might do in your garden, is actually something that's forbidden by the Torah law because you're plowing the field. Now, fertilizing is also considered plowing. Now let's go down the page for a second, some more examples. This is an example of planting. You cannot plant on Shabbat. In the tabernacle, they planted things to make dyes, so we cannot plant nowadays either. Therefore, you cannot, for example, plant trees in the field. You can't even clip a tree because that's almost like planting because you have to cut things to plant. You can't water the garden. That is all part of the malacha of planting. Let's keep going for a second. So there are 39 of these. I'm just going to do 3 or 4 just to show you how it's relevant. This one is called harvesting. What's harvesting? So you can't go to an apple tree and pull an apple off because you are detaching a plant. You're harvesting something. You can't mow the lawn because you're cutting the grass. You can't cut the tree. So that's some other examples. Not all of these are forbidden, by the way. So you can't take a flower off, but you can smell a flower. So that's why there's a little hand there going, you can do it. And finally, there's gathering. We'll skip that for a second. Now here's the one that's called building. Building is constructing or improving a structure. So here we go. The obvious building is putting a door on a house, repairing a wall, building your sukkah maybe. It might even be opening an umbrella because you're building like a covering for yourself. So all these things are either Torah or rabbinic. Okay, we don't have to go through the detail now, but you can see how building, even though building to us means putting bricks on a wall, can also mean, putting up a door or repairing a wall, doing repairs, putting on tiles. Anything to do with building is a malacha on Shabbat, another piece of work. And finally, just the last example I want to show you is demolishing. So demolishing is destroying a building. Now, you've got an example there of a guy breaking down a door, which we don't often do. But demolishing is anything where you're removing something that was built. Now, this is all very high level. So I'm just showing you some examples of some of the 39. I've only shown you 4. There are 39 of them. And each of these is very complicated. But I wanted to give you just an idea of the different types of work that we're going to talk about today, because now that you have a bit of knowledge about the 39 pieces of work, we're actually going to look at a practical example of how the rabbis analyze new technology. Okay, so just to summarize, here's actually one final one, just because I want to show you some other ones because you might need this for your test later on. This one is baking, right? Changing a physical substance, so you can't bake things. Now, this is actually quite an obvious one because I told you before that malacha means creative work. Creative work. Now, baking is actually creative because you're taking flour or whatever it is, you're putting it in an oven, and it's coming out a different substance. You're creating something new. So it's pretty obvious that piece of work is actually baking. And this is quite involved, and you'll notice things, for example, the cholent that we have on Shabbos. So you can't make cholent on Shabbos, but you can make it before Shabbos and keep it warm. You can't warm foods up, but you can have it warm the whole Shabbat. So that's baking. I think I put in, did I put in another 2 there? There's another 2 I wanted to show you. Here they are. Sorry, there is, can you all see that now? It's kindling. So that is lighting a fire, which we know is forbidden, or putting out a fire. Now, this is obviously relevant for even adding fuels to a fire. So remember, putting out a fire, lighting a fire, putting out a fire is forbidden on Shabbat. When I was very early in St. Kilda Shule, someone once called me with a question and asked me this following. They said, can you blow out birthday candles on Shabbat? And I said, no, you cannot, because it is extinguishing. But then I said, well, how did you plan on lighting them on Shabbat? Yeah. To which they said, oh yeah, didn't think of that, right? So obviously lighting birthday candles or extinguishing it is a problem. And of course you'll see this is actually a topic tonight, but you'll see the little picture here of the girl turning on a light, right? That is actually our discussion for tonight, because they've put it under the category of kindling a fire, but we'll soon see whether that is correct or not correct. And this is an interesting one. This is my final example, called the final hammer blow. Now, in the tabernacle, the Mishkan, when they set it up, the final hammer blow was also a piece of work. The final hammer blow sounds a bit weird, it's like when you put the nail in the coffin type thing. But the final hammer blow is actually finishing off an item, finishing off something that was unfinished. So he gives a very interesting example here, which I never really thought about till I read this before, which was putting new shoelaces into shoes. Because what you're actually doing is, if you've got shoes without shoelaces, it's not a finished product. But once you put the shoelaces in, you've got a perfect product. So actually putting shoelaces in a shoes could actually be a piece of work on Shabbat, which is quite interesting. But the classic example is in the times of the temple, when you had food, you had to take off a portion for the Kohen and a portion for the Levi. So you couldn't eat the food until then. So by taking out that portion from the food, you were finishing off the food and making it available to eat. And another interesting one here on the left, which is I'll leave you with, which is a guy playing an instrument. We know that we can't play instruments on Shabbat, right? Which is why we need our choir in Shule as opposed to a piano, right? We have to rely on the beautiful voice of our choir. So thanks Alec and Paul and whoever else is there. So we need you guys because we can't play musical instruments. And the reason is because it might, if your musical instrument breaks, it might lead you to repairing it. And if you repair an instrument and make it whole again, you've actually put on the final hammer blow. You've created it. So having that in mind, and I hope that does make sense to everybody. Does it sort of, do I get a few nods around the room? Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah.
That's a good summary of the 39 laws. I only gave you about 5 or 6.
Not the
Now,
musical instrument
before you
doesn't
get too
make
excited.
sense.
Sorry?
The musical instrument doesn't make sense.
Oh, well.
Yeah, how are you going to break a piano by playing a piano for 5 minutes?
No. It doesn't mean you're going to break it. It means that if you're playing an instrument and you find that it wasn't working properly, I mean, the classic example is before you play your violin, you've got to tune it. And you might find when the strings are broken, you'll go and fix it. By fixing the string, you're finishing off the instrument. But by the way, Jeff, before you nod at me or the other way around, it is only a rabbinic law. So obviously there's nothing wrong with actually playing the instrument from a Torah perspective. The rabbis just came and said, please don't play instruments because we're worried that you might fix it and therefore make an instrument complete. So again, it's rabbinic as opposed to the Torah. The Torah doesn't forbid it. It's the rabbis that put on their extra stringency to stop us doing the Torah. Now, a classic example of the rabbis adding on is, for example, yes?
When can we ask questions? Are we?
Well, your hand's up, so you may as well go for it.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, according to the illustration, it looks like that house is on fire. Are you telling me that you cannot put out a fire that is burning in your home?
Good question.
Yes, I did see that. Now, hang on a second. So you'll notice between...
Surely you may, and somebody might be in the home. Are you not saving a life?
Okay, very good. So that's a great question. So let me just go back. I won't show you again, but there was a picture of a guy putting the fire out. So there was actually, you didn't see it, or maybe I can show you. Should I just share the screen again? I didn't really give you this whole book. I mean, this is a complicated book. But let me just show you what you're actually seeing. I'll explain it. So just give me a nod when you can see that again.
Yeah,
You'll notice here, next to the guy with the fire, it says here, flames may be extinguished to save a life. So these pictures don't only have the forbidden things, it's also got the permissible things, right? So
Okay.
you ask a great question, which was, yes, you can put out the fire, and of course to save a life. The
Okay.
question is, what if it's a fire, but there's no saving life involved? That may be a bit more complicated.
Yes.
Definitely, if there's a fire and there's even a doubt whether you might be helping somebody, you can definitely put out the fire or call the fire engine on Shabbat. There is no issue. And as you know, we do have Hatzalah in Melbourne, and they are allowed to break Shabbat, and we can call them on Shabbat because it is saving a life. So thank you for the question, Alec, and I'm glad you picked up on that. But just to show you, a lot of the things in this picture are not only Torah. So I'll just show you quickly. See the little Torah scroll? That's showing you it's a Torah prohibition, switching on the lights. But there's also rabbinic ones, which there are none here rabbinic. Here we go. See, can you see my little mouse there? I'm showing you, it says reading by the light of an oil lamp. Now, most of you do not have oil lamps anymore, but in the olden days, right, before I was born anyway, when they used oil lamps, the rabbi said, be careful reading by an oil lamp because quite often they tried to push the oil to make the flame grow bigger. So even though it's not a Torah law to not read by an oil lamp, the rabbis came and said, please don't do it. Okay, so does that answer your question, Alec?
Yes, but I have another one that worries me a little bit because you said you cannot open an umbrella. Now tell me somebody wakes up on Shabbat morning and he wants to go to Shule, but it's pouring with rain. And he wants the umbrella to protect himself.
Right.
Otherwise he won't go to Shule. So
Right.
he's not permitted to go to Shule because he dare not open an umbrella.
Okay, well,
Does that make sense?
yeah, it does make sense. So I'll show you the picture here. I've got it here in front of me. You've got the red umbrella. And you'll see here, it says opening an umbrella is like erecting a tent. And it's a rabbinic law, okay? So it's a rabbinic law. Now, the reason they do that is because creating a tent is like building like a new building. And the rabbi said, we don't want you to do it because it's like creating a new building. Now, to answer your question about coming to Shul, I mean, getting wet should not stop you. I mean, I've many times walked in the rain to Shul.
I've walked in the rain many times.
And I've got a pair of a very nice raincoat. I've got rain pants and I've got a rain hat. So Alec, if you want to join me, I'm happy to share my raincoat with you next time, or we can walk to Shul together. And I'll guarantee you will not get wet. Your socks might, but your underpants will be completely dry. But thank you for the question. So I hope that answered it as well. Anyway, this is, I mean, we could spend days going through each of the melacha, but what I want to share with you tonight is actually, and I'll stop sharing so you can see me, is actually a question about electricity. And it's actually fascinating. And you'll actually be surprised at the answer in the end, but I don't know, does anyone know when electricity was sort of invented, or maybe not invented, but when was the first electrical appliance invented? Does anybody know?
1881.
There we go. Okay. What was it?
Edison.
Kettle? What was it?
It was an electric light bulb.
Oh, there we go.
Thomas
Great.
Edison.
So, thank you.
Led,
So we,
led to, it was the early one that Edison did and Galvani did.
okay. So when the whole idea of electrical appliances, and as you know, we all have electrical appliances, like our life is run by them. Sometimes we have many of them. But when the question of electrical appliance came up, the rabbis had to look at it from a new perspective and say, well, actually, electricity did not exist in the times of the temple. So you can easily just go, oh, look, it's not relevant. It's not in the temple. It's fine. We can use it. But what they did was they actually analyzed this and they went through it and they said, well, how is this relevant to us? Is it something we cannot use on Shabbat? And is it from a Torah perspective or is it a rabbinic perspective? And I'm going to share with you 7 different opinions, right? And I'd like you to be involved in this because I've actually given you, without you realizing, some of the tools to analyze it. But I've also given you some of the tools to actually rebuke some of them or revoke some of them and see what we come up with. So the first example, and I won't share with you the notes, so I can after if you'd like to. I'm happy to share it, but happy just to talk to you because I can see you all on screen. I feel like we're having more of a discussion that way. First one is a concept which I did not tell you about, something called molid. Molid is creating something new. Now, in the laws of the temple, there was nothing new they created. The rabbis came and said, we don't like things that you create from you. and therefore we're going to forbid it. But what this rabbi said, his name was Rabbi Shmelkus from the Bet Yitzchak. I'm not sure when he lived. It could have been in the very early 1900s. But he basically said that he did not like creating anything new on Shabbat, and using electricity is really doing something new, because you're creating a new current, a current to flow through the electricity and making it work. You're making something come alive, basically, a new type of creature. He didn't like something new. So every time you create a functioning appliance, you plug in your kettle and you press boil, and it boils the water. The electricity is making the electricity go through the kettle's blowing the water. You're creating something new by the electrical current. So he actually said the electrical current is something new, and he didn't like it. Now, there's a famous rabbi called Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He has a very novel opinion, and in fact, I'm going to give you 6 opinions, and he's going to disagree with each one of them. So if you think you can think of why he disagreed, feel free to put your hand up. But Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach lived, in fact, the yeshiva that I went to in Israel called Kol Torah in Jerusalem, he was the Rosh Yeshiva. He was the rabbi of the yeshiva. So when I got there in 1993, he was the senior rabbi of the yeshiva. In fact, he was quite old then, and he passed away in 1994. So he didn't live that long ago. He was alive 20 years ago. I met him. And he was a very, very big tzaddik, a very, very righteous man. He was one of the rabbis, which is very rare, that everybody in the whole world respected. If he said something, every Jew in the whole world respected it. He was like the world authority in halakha. He was also a genuinely nice guy, and there are many stories about him, about just his kindness and the way he sort of just dealt with himself. He was an amazing man. So his name is Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He was actually an old Yerushalmi, so he lived in Jerusalem his whole life, but he's very famous, and very famous on halakha. So this Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach actually disagreed with this opinion of creating something new. He said that when you do something routinely, like you put the current in, you take the current out, put the current in, you take the current out, you're not doing anything new. You're just running something on your regular basis. He didn't like the fact that every time you're creating something new every time. He says it's just a regular thing, you're putting electricity out. He disagreed with it. He said that is not a valid reason to stop electricity. And in fact, he added and he said the rabbis only stop creating something new in very limited circumstances. And this was not one of them. So he told Rabbi Shmelkus, I don't know if you ever met him, he says, I don't like this thing about new. It's not a good reason. Okay. So there's another reason from another rabbi. This rabbi is called the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish lived in Bnei Brak. I think he also passed away only about 40 years ago or so. Many people who are alive today had met him. So he's a modern rabbi from Bnei Brak. He said electricity is no good for another reason. He had a completely different reason. Now you'll notice that when these new technological advances come up, each rabbi will approach it from a different reason. And I think this is really important to realize, because they're not all wrong and they're not all right. It's just the way you analyze it, okay? So he said, actually using electricity is a problem. The reason he said was because you are actually building. It's bonnet, building. Why is it building? Because you're completing a circuit with electricity. You're finishing off a circuit and you're building something functional, right? So when you think of building, you think, oh, bricks on a wall, right? Oh, we've now got a house, or hammering in a piece of wood onto your wall to make the wall bigger. He's saying, no. Building can actually be something really small, like an electrical current. So he's actually saying he was building, you're building like this, this circuit. Or another way he looked at it was, when you put on your kettle, you're actually assembling different parts together. And by turning on the electricity and putting the current through, you're actually assembling a whole object. In other words, a kettle without electricity and without a button is nothing, right? Or a toaster without electricity does nothing. By putting the current through it, you are building an object, you're assembling an object, and that is forbidden on Shabbat. What do you think? Do you like that one?
What about opening and closing the front door?
Paul, you are. I don't want to make you get a big head or anything like that, because it's pretty big in the screen already. But that is actually what Rabbi Shlomo Zalman said. He says, Paul, I agree with you. Rabbi Shlomo said that I don't agree that opening a circuit or closing a circuit is building. because it's something that's done routinely, and it's almost like opening a door or closing a door. Because if you, no one thinks that opening a door and closing off a room is building on Shabbat. It's just a routine act that we do. We're not building something.
But you're completing a
So
wall.
Rabbi Auerbach said, actually, I disagree with you. This is not building a new, appliance. I disagree.
But when you are plugging in a kettle, you are causing a spark, Hillel, and that's what you're not allowed to do. Is that not so?
Right. Well, Alec, you're nearly as smart as Paul. I don't want to say smarter because he will get upset.
No.
But the next argument was actually sparks. So thank you for raising that. So another rabbi came and said, I don't like using electricity because it creates a spark. And when you generate a spark from an electrical circuit, you are creating a spark, a fire. A spark is a fire, right?
Yes.
Now, so this rabbi, I'm not sure actually who said it, but it was one of the rabbinic opinions said electricity is a problem because of the sparks. Now, Rabbi Auerbach again came and said, hang on a second. I don't like this one either. Why not? Because firstly, and this is another rule that you have to remember for Shabbat. In order to break Shabbat properly, you actually have to intend to do it. You have to want to do it. So if you accidentally do something, you should be careful, but it's not actually against the laws of Shabbat. So the argument against the spark is actually when you turn on the electricity, all you want to do is make the appliance run. You want the light switch to go, whatever it is. You don't really want to create that spark. It's an unintentional side effect. And therefore he says a spark is really not an issue. He added on to that, he said, hang on a second, a spark is even better. Because a spark, firstly, you can't even detect it usually, you can't even see it. And it's basically, I don't think it has any heat. Jeff, does sparks have any heat? It's probably minimal heat in it, right? You don't burn yourself if you get sparked by something, right?
I would
kill
think
yourself with it. You can kill yourself with a spark, but you don't get burnt, I don't think.
Now, I would think that if you've got an electric circuit like a kettle or something like that, and if you're making a spark, then I'd be taking a kettle to get checked or throw it out because
the point is also with the
making a spark in the switch.
That's BS.
As you close the circuit.
I think
that's maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but everything modern now, which we do routinely, everything modern now works so smoothly and efficiently. You don't have to turn a switch off or on to come into a room. You can walk into a room now and the lights will come on automatically. Now,
correct.
It's routinely.
No, that's correct. So Jeff, in fact, that is exactly what Rabbi Auerbach said. So he said, because today's technology has no sparks, the whole problem of having a spark is a moot point. So maybe, yes, 100 years ago sparks was a problem, but he says, firstly, he says it's not an issue because we don't intend for the spark. You don't want the spark. In fact, sparks are bad, right?
Hello.
But he said, one second, but he said that because today's technology does not even have sparks, it's not even a problem. Yes.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes. Esther.
What about the Shabbos clock?
What, a spark or what?
No. But you put the Shabbos clock on before Shabbos.
Yeah.
And you set it, and the lights come on. Yeah.
All right. Good point. So that's a good point, Esther. So I think what we're going to look through as we go through the opinions is there might be two problems with electricity. The first one is creating a flow of current, right? The second one is actually operating it. So when you talk about the Shabbos clock, you're not creating the flow of current, but perhaps operating it is a problem. So we're going to come to that question. So remind me then if I don't discuss it, but let's just go through the analysis and we'll come to your question. So thank you, Alec, for that one. So sparks we've dealt with and we've rejected that one too. So far we've got three opinions, 3 objections for Rabbi Auerbach. Now, the next one is Makaba Patish, which is, do you remember the one example I gave you, which is the final hammer blow, finishing off an object? So some authorities say that by using electricity and introducing an electric current, you're actually finishing off the product. In other words, a toaster is nothing without a current. So what
So
you're saying, when you turn the switch,
that if you're eating a bowl of soup, you should not have the last drop out of the bowl of soup because you're completing the bowl of soup.
well, no, it's not. A bowl of soup is not deconstructed, right? But a toaster is incomplete without turning the switch. A light bulb does not work without the switch. So by using the electricity, this rabbi's argument is that you're doing the final hammer blow, or you're completing an electrical circuit, and therefore it's a problem. Now, Rabbi Auerbach, again, in his wisdom, disagreed with that as well. And he said, no, I don't like that either, because really a final hammer blow is something, and this might answer your question, Paul, something that is permanent. In other words, when I finally put up the roof on my house or put up the brick wall, it's something that you've done both permanent and both with an effort. That's what he considers the final hammer blow. But just turning on an appliance and turning off an appliance is not something that's permanent. In fact, it's actually bad to leave your toaster on, right, with electricity. You don't want it to be on. You don't want the current to keep flowing through everything all the time. So he's saying that final hammer blow is something that has to be more permanent. So if you've got a hole in your boat and you plug it up with a piece of wood or with a cork, that is the final hammer blow. But just to put on a current, not something that's final, and therefore he disagrees and says that is not a reason to stop electricity. Okay? Agree?
All right. If you're going to turn on a toaster on Shabbos, you press the lever down, and it pops up automatically. So therefore,
but by you turning on the button, the argument is that you're finishing off the appliance and making it work. Yeah. In other words, if I just give you a toaster and say never plug it in, it's useless, right? Or if I give you a toaster without a plug, what's the point? You need to plug it in to make it work. And his argument is by plugging it in, you are finishing off the toaster. The Rabbi Auerbach says, well, that's silly, because really something that is finishing off an object is something that's more permanent. A toaster is used temporarily and then you unplug it, right? A light you put on and then you turn it off, right? In fact, if you leave your light on too much, it might even blow, right? But whatever. So he doesn't like that argument either. But here's another argument. I think I'm up to this. Must be number 4. You ready for number 4? Anyone else have any other ideas? You're free to shout out. The other argument, and this is from quite a modern day opinion, is that when you turn on your electricity, and this is different, by the way, to starting a current. This is actually a problem of operating something. So this is even if somebody turned it on for you, or your Shabbos clock turned it on for you, it's actually a problem of operating it. Now, what's the problem? He says like this: when you use your electricity, somebody has to add extra fuel to the electricity generators wherever they are. Now, I know nowadays we have lots of different types of energy, like we have solar power, we have wind power. But if we think of like a coal-generated station, for example, or whatever it is, or hydroelectric, by you using electricity, the generator has to make more for you. So you're actually making the generator work harder for you. Now, Jeff, before you nod, 1 second. I can see you're going, he's crazy, right? Which is fine. Rabbi Auerbach says, okay, that's a really nice idea. Very nice idea that you are making the substation work harder for you, or the coal station, or the wind power, whatever it is. Someone has to work harder for you. But he says, I disagree once again. He likes disagreeing, right? He says, really, really novel idea, but he disagrees for 2 reasons. Firstly, you are not actually directly causing the substation to make more electricity. It's an indirect act, right? Now, another rule we have to remember about Shabbat is to do something on Shabbat, you have to directly do it. If you do it indirectly, it's not a problem. And I'll give you a good example. You cannot kill animals on Shabbos, so you can never kill an animal. But for example, you can't kill a spider or an ant. But we know that when we walk down the street or on grass, we're probably going to step on an ant, probably. And we're probably going to squash it, right? But we know it is not a problem to do that because we do not intend to do it. So in order to go against a prohibition of Shabbat, you've got to actually intend. So Rabbi Auerbach says, it's a really nice idea that when you turn on the electricity, somebody down at the coal station is adding more, or the wind power is working more. but that is indirect. It's not you doing it, it's an indirect. He says, secondly, another reason is because really when you turn on your PowerPoint, there's probably a million other Australians at the same time using the electricity. So it's not even you who's doing it, it's just a whole group of people. So it's not even directly your problem. Thirdly, in Australia, it's very rare to find an actual Jew in the power station adding coal to the fire or turning the wind park or whatever they do in the power station. I don't know what they do, right? Jews usually do not work in power stations. So he says, even if you say that you're doing that, it's anyway a Gentile doing it for you and it's not a problem, right? Because they're not breaking Shabbat. Now, that's a really nice idea, except for the fact that you might have a problem in Israel. Because in Israel, it's probably likely that there will be a Jew at the substation and there will be a Jew sitting at the computer at the substation doing whatever they're doing. And it's for that reason, even the Rabbi
Israel doesn't have any coal power stations.
Oh, whatever they're doing over there.
It's all solar and hydroelectric.
But
Okay.
somebody is still monitoring it,
Someone's sitting there.
switching it on and off.
Yeah.
How do you know?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Henry.
Can I ask you? Yeah, I want to know, in the early days, they didn't have electricity, and if you wanted to wash yourself or have a bath, how would you light it with wood? You'd have to light it in some way to heat the water.
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't.
Well, you would. Well, that you couldn't have a bath on Shabbat.
Yeah, we're not
We
living
couldn't
in
on the water.
those days. Henry.
But I think in those days, to answer your question, and what did you say?
I said we're not living in those days now.
No,
It doesn't matter.
I think
Our rules were based on the old days.
No, but I think Henry, just to answer your question, I'm pretty sure in the old days they only showered once a week anyway, and it probably wasn't a Friday. So, and I know that because I've got some grandparents that used to only have a bath once a week. So, and I'm sure that's what they did in Hungary. So I'm sure the rest of the world did the same. But yeah, you couldn't have a bath on Shabbat for that reason. Okay, so finally, so it is true in fact that even though this is not technically this is not a problem, it's just a good thought process. I do know of some people in Israel that will not use the electricity on Shabbat, will not use lights, unless they have a generator in their apartment building, which has nothing to do with power stations. Okay, now I'll give you one more final reason, and then I'll tell you something really interesting. So, of course, by the way, this is all a discussion and analytical before we get to something practical. The final one is actually heating. The wire gets hot when you turn on electricity, and it could actually glow. Now, I know nowadays that doesn't happen, but in those days, electricity could happen. And the problem there is that you're actually considered like cooking on Shabbat because you're cooking a wire. Now, I know it's not cooking in terms of boiling an egg, but you are making the wire hot. And making it glow, right, because often things that when they get hot become glow is like lighting a fire. But again, as Jeff said before, today's technology is not like that. It's very rare for appliances to get hot or to glow. In fact, if your toaster was glowing except for the element inside, actually that's a good example. Your toasters do glow inside, don't they? But if your kettle was actually glowing, you'd be in probably trouble and you'd chuck it out. Or your iron was glowing hot. So it's not really relevant today. So just to finish that all off, so we've had 6 really interesting arguments as to why electricity might be a problem. But Rabbi Auerbach, in his wisdom, disagreed with them all, right? And he said, I don't like any of them. And he actually ended off his opinion by saying, I actually don't see a problem with using electricity on Shabbat. The Rabbi Auerbach, this is 20 years ago, said electricity technically should be fine because I don't like any of the 6 reasons that anybody gave. I disagree with them all. So in his opinion, you can use electricity on Shabbat. However, he said, because our tradition, based on rabbinic opinion throughout the ages since it was invented, is that we cannot use it, he doesn't want to go and change the whole world with his opinion. What he did say was, when we actually need to use it, and it might be for medical reasons or for life-saving reasons, he didn't see any issue to do it. And in particular, an electrical item that does not glow or does not get hot would not be a problem or would not make a sound. So in the end, see, I've given you lots of different opinions. You're going, what can I do now? Can I follow Rabbi Auerbach and just use electricity? Which is probably what you're thinking. And the answer is that Rabbi Auerbach himself said, even though I don't think technically there's a problem, you should not use it because he didn't want it to be abused, people not knowing what they're doing. Secondly, tradition is very strong. And therefore he said, I want you to keep doing what you're doing, which is not using electricity. Now, what I will, and by the way, there's also another rule of law, which is when you have a majority of rabbis and one, you always have to follow the majority. So he is a lone rabbi amongst many, even though he was the greatest rabbi of the generation, we still do follow other rabbis. And he himself said, because many other opinions don't use it, I'm going to not allow it. Now, I'm going to give you in the last 5 minutes that we have, just some quick applications of this rule. And as I said, we do have a part 2 of this series, which is in 2 weeks' time. And we will go into very interesting discussions around Shabbos lifts, hearing aids, speakerphones. But today I want to just raise one with you, all right? Actually, I'll raise 2 things really quickly. The first one is light globes. Now, there are 2 types of light globes we use nowadays because most of our light globes are LED. Now, LED is actually less of a problem because inside the LED, there's no sort of wire. But if you think of those old globes, and we all remember them, where there was sort of a piece of glass and there was an incandescent light and there was a piece of glowing hot wire in between it, right? And the way the light worked was that wire actually basically went on fire. But because there was no oxygen, it didn't actually go on fire, it didn't burn, but it lit up.
Incandescent.
So, incandescent, exactly. So what the rabbi said with an incandescent light, that's a big problem because using all the opinions we've just discussed, it's either lighting a fire, which is technically a fire you're lighting because it's burning the element. You're creating light, which is a problem. You're also creating heat. If you ever touch those incandescent lights, your finger burns, right? Because it's heat. So according to them, an incandescent light is actually a Torah prohibition because not only are you turning electricity on, which is building or creating a stream of current, but you're actually heating something up, you're creating light, and you're creating something new. So those lights are, from a Torah perspective, absolutely forbidden. LED lights are probably only rabbinic at best, and fluorescent lights as well. So turning on lights on Shabbat is less of an issue from a Torah perspective, but of course the rabbi still said don't use it. The really interesting discussion, and this is actually a fascinating area of law, and you might think it's funny, but just bear with me for a second, and that is using your fridge on Shabbat. Now, I'm not talking about the light in the fridge. The light in the fridge definitely has to go off, right? And there are different things. You can take out the light bulb, you can put a Band-Aid on it, or we have a little switch, we can just turn the light off. If you buy a Fisher & Paykel, I think there's a Sabbath mode on it. We can just turn the lights off on the fridge. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that when you open the fridge, right? When you open the fridge, you let in warm air. And when you let in warm air, what happens? The motor of the fridge turns on. Now, I know it doesn't happen straight away, but definitely when you've opened that fridge and you've let in warm air, the fridge gets colder and the motor goes on. Now, as we've just discussed in the past hour, using electricity on Shabbat is forbidden. So theoretically, when I open my fridge, letting in the warm air, turning on the motor, it's a bit of a problem. But you can think it might be a problem. Now, there's one way to get around that easily, which is only open the fridge when the motor's running. That's easy. So, if you put your ear to the fridge and you can hear that type of noise, unless you have one of those really expensive quiet fridges, mine definitely makes noise. Not a problem, because you can open the door, the motor's running, you're not doing anything different. But what about when the motor's off? You open the door, you crank the motor. So just before you go crazy at me, you are allowed to open your fridge on Shabbat. That is the consensus of opinion. But I'll tell you the reason. The reason is because when you open that fridge, the motor doesn't go on straight away. It happens a minute later, 30 seconds later, 5 minutes later, right? It doesn't necessarily go on. And secondly, your intention is not to turn the motor on. Your intention is to open the fridge. So if we use those 2 reasons, which is not direct and not intentional, we are allowed to open a fridge on Shabbat. So just to say that again, theoretically, it could be a problem because when you open the fridge, warm air goes in, the motor goes on. But the rabbinic opinion is that it's okay because firstly, you do not intend for the motor to go on. right? As opposed to when you turn your kettle on, you want the kettle to go on, or when you want the toaster to go on, you turn the toaster on. In this case, you don't want the motor to go on. In fact, it's even worse. You don't want the motor to go on because it costs you money, right? Every time your fridge goes on, it costs you half a cent, right? We don't like spending half a cent on our fridge, right? In my in-laws' house, if I open the fridge for more than 3 seconds, I got screamed at. Close the fridge. You're wasting electricity, right? Don't tell my in-laws that, right? My father was more generous. He let us open the fridge more often. But
Hi, Debbie.
Oh, no. Debbie's listening.
I heard that.
But,
Hi, Debbie.
great, thank you, Debbie. I thought I was safe, but I was not. But so it's even better because we do, not only do we not intend for the motor to go on, we don't want the motor to go on because it costs us money. But secondly, it's called a grama. Grama means we do not. It's not our direct causation for it to go on. It's indirect. And this concept of indirect is a really important concept on Shabbat, a very important concept, because we can really only do something if you directly cause it. By indirectly causing something to happen, it's not a problem. So putting those two reasons together, we are allowed to open a fridge on Shabbat. Now, I've told you a lot today. I'm going to finish off the class now. But using those concepts, next week, next time, we are going to go through some really practical reasons. And what I want you to do is next time when I give you the reasons, I'd like you to use all the principles that we've learnt and see how we can apply it ourselves. Because basically what we're doing is actually what the rabbis do. When any rabbi gets a question on technology or on something new, and it's not dealt with in halacha, we have to go back to the good old books and we say, well, we know that electricity is not written in the Torah, but a lot of concepts can be used to interpret it. How are we going to do it, right? Now, sometimes it's easy to do, and sometimes it's really, really hard. And that's why we have rabbis who are greater than us, and their rabbis greater than them, until you get all the way to Rabbi Auerbach, who was the greatest, where he can make decisions for the whole generation. We really don't know what to do. So, a great example now is with the coronavirus, where we've had, obviously we've all stopped minyanim, but it wasn't an easy decision, especially early on when we didn't know how dangerous it was. So, to actually cancel a shul is a very big decision. It's not written in the Torah. The Torah doesn't say, if there's a virus in town, stop shuls. We've got to use our common sense and our knowledge of medical things and the importance of saving lives to actually make decisions for ourselves. So that's what we're doing. So we'll stop there, and I'll actually stop the recording now. So feel free to ask anything that you'd like. Thanks all for joining.